So today I'm here to bring you the best science fiction fantasy books that have been published in 2023 so far. This is the final video in my best of the year so far lists, and so if you do want to check out my playlist, I'm going to have it linked up in the cards and in the description box. And essentially I'm talking about the best books that again were published right now that I have read, but obviously the year is still young, and I do expect that these lists are going to evolve quite a bit, so I'm excited to see which of these books makes the final cut when I come to do my end of the year lists closer to December. All that being said, let's get started. Let's start with science fiction first this time around, beginning with Terraformers by Annalise Newitz. And this is a standalone book that follows an individual who is working to terraform this planet called Sasky along with their pet moose. And along the way, they discover that possibly the planet is not as empty and desolate as they once believed. And of course, the story goes from there. This is an incredibly smart story that is a great response to the classic terraforming and colonizing stories of the past. I think the author does a great job of calling back to those classics while having more of a modern twist. This one is just very intelligent. This one definitely has a lighter, kooky tone, which isn't perhaps entirely to my personal taste, but even though it's not, I just appreciate a book that is so well done. A book like this definitely catches my attention, and as I said in my review, I do recommend this one, particularly for those of you that already read science fiction. Certainly you could pick it out as a beginner, but I think you're going to get a lot more out of it if you've already read the classics and are a little bit more familiar with what the author is trying to do with those familiar tropes. Definitely enjoy this one. This is an author to watch. I thought they did a great job with this one, and I think a lot of you will enjoy it too. Next, at number 4, we have Blood and Bile by Catherine Franklin, and this is the second book in a series, so you do need to start back at the beginning, which is with Empyrean. In the beginning of that book, we follow a woman who, at the start of the story, is grieving the loss of her son. He has been killed through the use of empiric powers, and she teams up with another person to go and seek revenge. This world, this future, this galaxy is fascinating. I love the involvement of this empiric force and how it's woven into the story. Normally, I'm very leery when there are aspects of fantasy in my sci-fi. Usually I like it to go away, but in this case, it was so well done. I found the character work to be intricate and the world building to just be expansive and fascinating. And while I liked book 1, I'll be honest, I thought that book 2 was definitely a step up in terms of all the aspects I loved in the first. I just felt like it really proved itself as a sophomore novel. And again, you want to start back at the beginning, but please continue on. This book is fantastic. It's dark and brutal, and I love the ending. I'm dying for more after that ending, and I'm excited to see what this author is going to do next. Then at number 3, we have Rubicon by J.S. Dews, and this is a piece of military science fiction that follows a soldier who just wants to die. However, through the use of future technology, they are brought back to life after a tragic accident, and in order to assist them, they are given this virtual assistant, this AI that is implanted within their brain. However, as we progress through the story, we as the reader and the main character start to wonder if this AI has possibly become sentient, and of course the story goes from there. This is one I really enjoyed, and I am not someone who normally likes military science fiction. It's not my go-to subgenre. I've explored it before. I like it, but I'm just not someone who gets excited by a lot of action. And instead, this one worked well because of the fact that while it has action, it's very character focused, it's very smart. Of course, a lot of the story revolves around the artificial intelligence, the question of what makes someone sentient, and everything else that comes along with that. And I thought it was just really fun. It was fast paced and easy to follow. I think it's great for beginners, but also has a little bit of meat for someone like myself who reads a lot of science fiction and is looking for something with a little bit more depth. Overall, I just thought this was a really solid book that kind of had all the aspects that I'm looking for in a science fiction story in a new, fresh package that just was really fun, exciting, and again, one where I just want more. Then at number 2, we have The Deluge by Stephen Markley, and this is an epic science fiction thriller that is told over multiple perspectives. It's set near the present day in a world where there is definitely signs of climate change as well as a lot of political tension. And the story again is told from different perspectives, but the starting event is that we have this scientist who receives a death threat. And what I like with a story like this, is one of my favorite kinds to read, is you have all these different perspectives and you have to figure out how they all are going to fit together. This is definitely a book that reminded me a lot of The Swarm, which happened to be one of my favorite back checklist books from this year. So I was very excited to see a new release that had a similar vibe to it, where once again it's dealing with climate change. You have a multicast of characters, and there was a lot of science at the center of the story. This one, I'll be honest, is a little less focused on the science, as the characters do play a larger role, but it definitely has similar themes. And I do need to admit that there's definitely some unlikable characters within this cast. So if you need to love your characters in order to enjoy a story, this one may not be for you. It's uncomfortable, it's vulgar, it's kind of gritty for whatever reason, and it also deals heavily with political topics. This story, if you look it up, is very long. I think it's 900 and some pages, and I flew through it. I could not stop reading, and while there's definitely a lot going on, it almost feels a bit meandering. I enjoyed the ride, and the ending, without giving away too much, definitely left an impact on me. It's not an ending everyone's going to enjoy, but I thought it fit the story very well, and definitely, again, left an impression, which is what I'm looking for with a story. These books that I'm marking here are books that, at least in the short term, are books that have held up in my memory as I read more books throughout the year. I'm hoping that these books will continue to stay in the forefront of my mind, and I think that's going to be the case with this one because I really enjoyed it. It was very unique and different, but also leaning into a lot of my favorite tropes within science fiction, and I just can't recommend it enough, although I do have to admit it's not going to be for everyone. But if you have similar tastes to me, if you enjoy gritty sci-fi thrillers with big ideas and exciting character work and development, this one is really something special. And the #1 book for science fiction so far this year is The Infinite by Ada Palmer. This is the third and final book in the trilogy that started with The Outside. You do need to start back at the beginning, and so in that first book, we followed this brilliant scientist and engineer who happens to be autistic. Right at the beginning of the story, something terrible goes wrong and she causes a meltdown, and then the story goes from there into different directions, and it's set in a world that's very much inspired by Lovecraft. It is cosmic horror in a science fiction package. And so we have a world where the artificial intelligence have risen above humans and become a form of gods. And so within this trilogy, we deal with the resistance and the rebellion of the humans. They explore the outside and what that means. This is just trippy, unique, and easily one of the most different science fiction ideas I've read in stories. I love this series so much. It's definitely one I want to reread again and again, and I tend to appreciate each time I visit it. And so if you haven't yet, highly recommend this one. It is smart and kooky and everything I love in science fiction. This author is brilliant and I highly recommend their work, but yes, you do have to go back to the beginning, read that one as well as a sequel, and then finally finish up the trilogy with this one, which was fantastic. Then switching over to fantasy, let's talk about #5, The Night Angel Nemesis. And this is of course by Brent Weeks. This is a book that is technically a spin-off series following after the events of the original Night Angel trilogy. And I will admit that you do want to go back and read the original trilogy first, because I don't think you're going to appreciate this one as much if you aren't already in love with the characters, because this one does pick up after the events that close out the trilogy, which has kind of mixed feelings towards how people feel about the end of the trilogy. And then we follow the same characters. So it's definitely a case where you want to pick up where things left off so that you don't miss anything and instead can appreciate the character development that's already happened. I really enjoyed this one. I love the character work. I love the interactions. It's a little bit funny. I don't tend to love silly fantasy or really over-the-top humor, but for me, Brent Weeks has just the right amount of witty dialogue and kind of goofy jokes without getting too silly in my mind, and it just totally always hits right for me. I just found myself flying through this book, even though it's incredibly long. It's a big book, but the narrative is so well written. It's an enjoyable one. I would only recommend it for those of you that already love the Night Angel trilogy, because again, I think that it doesn't necessarily stand on its own, and so much of what I love about it is just wanting to spend more time with characters. But I really love Brent Weeks' writing. I think he's really talented. He's great at writing plot and action, and it really shines through within these stories. So I do recommend this one. I can't wait to read more in this follow-up series. Then at #4, we have Lost in the Moment and Found by Shauna McGuire. This is technically a book in the Wayfarer Children's series, and I have not read all the original novellas, but this one does work as a standalone. But I have a feeling that if I had read the entire series, I would love this one even more, and it might have earned a higher place on my list. But in the story, particularly, we follow a young girl who, right at the beginning of the story, her father suffers, I believe, a heart attack and falls dead. And so her mother goes and marries and brings in another man. You find out, and it's very lightly done, so it's very thoughtful how the author does this to try to avoid being triggering for the reader. But she brings in another man who is clearly having an inappropriate relationship with this young girl, and she's just trying to block it out, trying to process what is happening. And again, it's heavily implied without the author going so far as to really draw or have things be pictured on the page, which I do appreciate. I think it's going to make this book a little bit easier to digest, even though it's still a really hard one to get through. But I just found it to be such an impactful read. And then of course, because this is fantasy, I should mention that within the story, she finds a way to get through a fantasy portal into the other world and basically escapes that reality. This is one where I adored the character work. I felt so deeply for this young girl, the situation she was in. And again, I was highly impressed by how nuanced and thoughtful the author was and how they presented a story like this, which easily could be incredibly triggering to an audience. And certainly I'm not the best sensitivity reader for this topic, but I think that the author was very mindful in what they were doing. And I just thought it was very well thought out and well considered. And overall, just really enjoyed this one. The second half, when she is through the portal, I liked it as well. But again, I feel like that part is a little bit more dependent on me already knowing and loving the characters that you meet throughout the portal, because I didn't necessarily recognize the characters she was running into, where I feel like I was supposed to have known them. But again, this book still being in my number 4 spot, given the fact that I haven't read those books, really speaks to how impactful the story is. And so I can't wait to go back, read the original stories, and then reread this one. And I suspect I'm going to love it even more. Then at number 3, we have The Basilisk Throne by Greg Keyes. This is a book that is a piece of epic fantasy that follows multiple character perspectives. We follow a young man and his son who are traveling the seas. There's also his daughter who is sent off to essentially just be a token or a present for this other land. And right within the story, we are encountering some really grim and dark realities to this society. The first chapter, there is a horrible scene of sexual abuse that is right on the page, and it is really hard to read. Definitely be aware of your content warnings and go check that out if you are someone who is sensitive to that. It's a very gripping story. I love the action in it. I'm not someone who gets excited about action scenes in fantasy, but these were so well done that I could completely vividly understand and picture what was happening, which is not something I would always say when I read a fantasy book like this. And I was just completely enamored in what was happening. I especially love the scenes set at sea, which is a fair amount of the book. And I loved it a lot. I would like to see the character development upped in later books because definitely there's more to come. But I believe this is a debut novel, and for that I thought it was very well done. It has a lot of potential, and I'm definitely going to continue on. So very excited to find a new fantasy series that I'm excited about. Then at number 2, we have The Crane Husband by Kelly Barnhill. This is a magical realism dark novella that follows a girl who is trying to take care of her family. Her father has passed away and her mother is struggling. One day her mother brings home a new husband. However, that husband is actually a crane, hence the aspect of magical realism. I actually reviewed this book in my dark fiction wrap-up, and I definitely could have put it in a best of the year list for dark fiction, but I happen to have already posted that video, so I decided to place this here. But it definitely walks the line. It's a very dark piece of fiction, but it does technically have fantastical elements because of the use of a crane as a metaphor for yet another abusive spouse and partner. So this story, once again, had very similar themes to the previous book I talked about by Shauna McGuire. This one's a little bit higher up on the list because of the fact that I felt like it was a stronger piece and held its own without being reliant on other books. The entire story is done through a very beautiful literary, again, magical realism style that I just thought was lovely. It was beautiful to read, but at the same time, of course, as the reader, you're aware of the darkness behind the story, what everything is actually meaning and representing. And it's, again, done in a way that I think is very thoughtful for those that might find this material triggering. But it's such an important topic to discuss. It's crazy that I have 2 books on this list that deal with similar things, but this one was so well done, left a huge lasting impact, and I can't wait to see more of you picking up. Hopefully you love it too. Whether you love fantasy or dark fiction, I think this one will appeal to both audiences. And my number one fantasy book published in 2023 so far is The Tyranny of Faith by Richard Swan. And I'll be honest, it will take a special book to knock it off my number one spot because this is easily the front runner in terms of fantasy. And so this, of course, is the second book that follows up after The Justice of Kings. So you do need to read that one first because it is a direct sequel. In the first book, we follow a man who serves as a justice for the land. So he investigates crimes and then proclaims whether or not the person is innocent or guilty. And if they are guilty, he then goes and can execute them or make them pay for their crimes. The interesting thing about this entire series is that it's actually told from the perspective of his scribe or his young assistant, this young girl who follows around. And I love that perspective because you can imagine the justice himself is a fascinating character, and I love the fact that we don't get to see inside his mind and instead we get to only see him from the outside, which I think adds to the mystery or keeps the mystery there. And I really like this young woman. I know not everyone does, I don't know why, but I think that she is smart and relatable, and I just really enjoy her perspective. And I like the first book, but I like the second book even more. I became further attached to the characters. I thought the development was great. There was some scenes that made me fangirl, as I've alluded to before. And I am just so excited to see what else the series is going to do. I assume it's a trilogy, but I'd be happy to read as many books as the author wants to publish because I love this one a lot. I can't wait to reread it. Highly recommend. But again, go back to Justice of Kings if you haven't read that one yet. And this one is well worth your time. Such a good one. And yeah, like I said, definitely contender for Book of the Year. We'll see if anything can top it. So that's it for the best science fiction fantasy published this year so far. But again, we're early into the year and I'm purposely doing this video now so that I have a chance to see if these books are actually going to have the staying power to continue on and be favorites once I read everything else that comes out this year, or as much as I can possibly get my hands on. If you're new to my channel, I do read a lot of science fiction fantasy as well as dark horror thrillers and other creepy things. And so I hope you stick around for my year-end list coming again towards December, January. And so if you want to subscribe, appreciate that. If you want to give this video a thumbs up, I appreciate that too. You can hit that little notification bell so you never miss a video from me. And if you want to drop a comment, I would love to hear what is your favorite book, fantasy or science fiction that was published this year. And if you don't have anything to say, just drop me a little emoticon like a space rocket or a dragon. That helps me out too. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.